Hi, everybody. It's Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm pleased to introduce Eric Spellmann, public speaker. He is great on these topics because he's going to really give us a lot of information, good information. How am I being found on Google? What are my customers typing? I want to remind everyone, if you have any questions, type them in immediately into Q&A, because he picks them up throughout the entire webinar. He goes off topic. I know he does, but it's always relevant, and it's important for you and your business. So Eric, turning it over to you.
Okay, I hope all of y'all are ready. I really do, because there's going to be a lot of information. You know, sometimes when people hear me speak, they describe it simply as like trying to drink from a fire hose. Well, don't forget, the entire copy of this presentation will be made available to you. So don't feel like you have to write down all of these points. Also, you can rewatch this as many times as you want, especially once it goes up to the NMSBDC's website. So don't worry, you're not going to miss a thing. I mainly want you to take notes on how some of this might be relevant to you. So we're going to be bouncing around some websites on this one, so get ready. You know, a lot of people come up to me and they say, Eric, how do I get more traffic to my website? How do I get more customers? How do I get more internet visitors? Well, the key really is understanding how people are searching for what you do. You've really got to understand it. So here are going to be the main things that we talk about, and they are all very, very, very important. Number one, we're going to talk about what people really want. Now, I know that sounds vague. I know it sounds almost like, you know, a dating reality show. But when you understand what people really want, then you can make sure that what you're offering is valid. We're going to talk about the psychology of search. In other words, how people, what goes through their mind when they're searching for something. It's different than you think. And trust me, the least qualified person to figure out how your customers are searching for you, the least is you. You are the least qualified person to come up with that, mainly because you're two in the box. So we're going to talk about how to get around that, how to get around yourself, because you are the barrier on this one. We're going to talk about discovering the trends. In other words, what are people searching for? What is the popular searches as it relates to what you do? We're going to talk about ads people buy. And when I say ads, I mean online ads, because if you understand the online ads, because people are dropping money on this, you can see some other trends. Okay, it's kind of one of my little secrets I'm going to show you. And then we're going to talk about finish this sentence, and I'll explain that when we get to it. And finally, people also ask, oh, wait, did I say finally? There's going to be one other little thing I drop in here if there's time, because once I show you how people are searching for you, I'm going to give you the super short version of how to get found on Google, how to rank better. Okay, so stick around to the end, because a lot of you are going to consider that the most important part of this entire presentation. So without further ado, let's dive right in. What do people really want? You know, this sounds like a psychology question. This sounds like such a, you know, a deep, wise man at the top of a mountain kind of a question. And so here's the answer, and it's going to sound just as crazy. No one wants your product or service. You need to get that through your head. You need to realize no one wants what you sell. Did you hear me? No one wants what you sell. They want the value it brings. Do you understand the difference? They don't want your product. No one wants to buy your product. No one wants to pay you to do anything for them. They want the value of what that brings. In other words, the way I like to put this is, no one wants to buy a shovel. They want a hole. Their ultimate goal is a hole. The shovel is simply the means to achieve what they really want. Too many times, business owners start to think that customers Their goal is a product. Their goal is a service. And if you start thinking like that, you're not going to go down the right path. You know, when I used to build websites for people, I got into that kind of thinking because I did it for a very long time. I mean, we were the largest web designer between Dallas and Denver. And yeah, after a while with all my employees, we kind of I got anyway, into the wrong thinking that everyone wanted a website. No, that's not what they wanted. They wanted more business. They wanted to be found. They wanted to be online. You see what I'm saying? They wanted higher profit. They wanted higher revenue. The website was simply a means to achieve that. So the first kind of right thinking you need to start with on this, especially when it comes to what people are searching for, they ain't searching for your product, okay? They're searching for the value that your product brings. And so the ultimate question is, do you come up for the value being sought? What is the value that your product or service brings? Have you ever asked that question? What is the value that you bring? You know, no one wants an accountant. Heck, I don't. But what do you want? You want good numbers you can make decisions from. You don't want to get audited by the IRS. You see what I'm saying? What is the value that an accountant brings? What is the value that a landscaping service brings? No one wants to hire someone to mow their yard. They want a good looking yard. They want the value of their home to look better. You follow me? So start thinking about the value that you actually bring to people. And once you start realizing that your product is simply a means to an end, then you will start realizing what people really are searching for. So my question again, do you come up for the value that you offer? And that brings me to this. Keywords versus questions. You know, Google, and I'll just tell you right now, Google is the only one that matters. Forget Yahoo, forget AOL, forget Ask Jeeves, forget Bing. None of those other searches matter. All that matters is Google. They get 98%. 98% of all searches. So forget everyone else. They don't matter. To be honest, Google is really in charge of whether your business survives or not on the internet. And whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's just reality. Okay? So all the advice you're going to hear me give has to do with Google. And let me just tell you right now, Google prefers and will give you better answers and better results if you ask it questions. Google did a study between men and women. And they put men and women in a room and they gave them things to search for. And they discovered that men, for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part, typed in keywords. Women would actually type in questions. And like I said, who do you think Google went for on that one? The women. I'm telling you, Google's computers are a lot smarter than you realize. They're operating at about this is going to creep you out, but from an intellectual standpoint, they're operating at about a 5th grade level. They understand the difference between what and when, who and how. And so if you use those words when asking questions, you will get different answers and more accurate answers. Gone are the days when you just type in cars into Google. You know, that's what we used to do. You want to buy a car, you just go to Google and type in cars. No. Today, you'll type in something like, what's the cheapest 2007 Jeep Liberty in Amarillo? And Google will give you the answer. People have learned that when they're too vague with their questions or too vague with their keywords even, they don't get the result they want. I swear it gets too much sometimes when my phone tries to answer when I use the word Google too much. So like I said, learn to start asking questions. And the easiest way I can think of it is if you start treating Google like a person, and I know that's creepy as all get out, but when you start treating Google like a person, you'll get better responses. You'll get better answers. I have one of those Google Minis, a few of them actually in my home, and I'm asking it questions all the time, and it talks back to me, and they're very, very accurate. I've gotten over the whole creepy thing. It's just very helpful. It's very helpful. And it's kind of like we've entered the age of Star Trek. Remember, where they could just talk to the computer and it would give them the answer no matter where they walked in that spaceship. We're there. Okay. So start treating Google like a person. Interact with it like a person, and you will get better responses. Ask it questions. Don't just throw out random keywords. Let's talk about the psychology of search. Okay. If you understand how people think, you're better able to understand how they're going to search for you. So I usually give people 3 questions when people say, well, Eric, what are people searching on? As it relates to what I do, Eric, what are they searching on? So here's what I tell them. First thing you need to do is you need to pull 5 of your customers, because what did I say earlier? You are not qualified to answer the following questions because you're too in the box. You know too much about what you do. You need to start thinking like your ignorant customers. And yeah, I know that sounded insulting. I don't say the word ignorant as an insult. Ignorant simply means they don't know as much as you about what you do. Okay? Like I said, you know too much. So what I would recommend, and it's one of the best things you will ever do, is talk to 5 of your best customers and ask them these questions. First question, what problem is your product or service the solution to? Okay, remember I talked about, no one's looking for your product. They're looking for the answer to a problem maybe, or the solution to a problem. So what problem does your product solve? What problem does your service fix? What problem is it that people have that they seek an answer that your product or service gives them? What is the actual problem? Like, no one wants a plumber. They want an unstuck toilet. You follow me? No one wants a cookbook. They want amazing food. Okay? You got to start thinking the right way, understand the psychology of search. Because here's the deal. If you don't talk enough on your website about the problems you're solving, you're never going to come up when people type those problems in. Yeah, I just said that. I'll say it again. If you don't talk enough about the problems you solve, you're not going to come up when people search on how to solve those problems. Second question you need to ask your customers, this little group of 5 people. What question is your product or service the answer to? So look at the first one. What problem are you the solution to? The second one is, what question are people asking that your product or service is the answer to? What is the question? Some of y'all think, well, we're the answer, we're the solution, but you never think about what's the question. You need to ask that. And you need to ask your customers what they think the question is. Okay? How do I not get audited by the IRS? Okay, that's a question that an accountant is a solution to. Does that make sense? So what do we got? What problem is your product or service the solution to? What question is your product or service the answer to? And give people time to think about this, because the final one is the most important one of all. This one will give you answers that will freak you out when you ask your customers this. If I didn't know your company name, how would I search for you? If your customers didn't know your company name, how would they search for you? Some of y'all would go, well, that's easy. They would search for accountants. They would search for plumbers. They would search for. See, you assume that. That's why you're not qualified to answer these questions. Some of the answers your customers are going to give on this are not even going to be accurate. They're going to be wrong because a lot of your customers assume you do things that you don't do. It's going to freak you out. But here's the deal. It doesn't make it any less relevant. You're simply getting an example of how people are searching for you. Does that make sense? These are 3 of the most important questions you will ever ask some of your customers. And I promise you, if your customers are being honest with you on the answers, it will blow you away. Okay? So promise me you will ask these questions. Just pick 5 of your random customers, maybe people that you know and trust, and they do business with you all the time, and just ask them. You could even do it as an email. Have them reply back with their answers. Doesn't have to be formal, but it's going to help you understand how people see what you do from the outside of the box. Okay, discover the trends. This is a big one. You got to realize that search is kind of like trends. When people go to Google, a lot of people are searching for the same thing, and they're searching for the same thing at around the same time. Like more and more people search for Christmas gifts around what time? Christmas. A lot of people search for, weird Halloween noises around what time? October. And, some people are looking for different things depending on what state they're in. Well, guess what? Google has given you an amazing tool to help you find these things. And it's at trends.google.com. It's, in my opinion, one of the best free tools you will ever find about understanding what searches are popular and what searches are not. And don't you dare go there right now while I'm talking. You can go there when I'm done. Okay? Because I'm going to show you an example of it here in a second. Basically, Google Trends, which is what we call it, it shows the popularity of searches. Okay? Now, it's kind of tied to keywords. And I know I told you to ask questions, but you'll understand when you see it. It shows you like, is this search for this keyword, this search for this topic, how popular is it versus this search? You can compare it, and it also breaks it down by regions. And if it's a popular search, it'll take it down like, what's the most popular search in this area, in this state? It'll even take it down to what's the most popular search in Houston? What's the most popular search in Albuquerque? It's crazy what you can see with this. Here's an example. Maybe you are an attorney, maybe you are a lawyer, and you're wondering, are more people searching Google for attorneys, or are they using the word lawyer? What do y'all think? Now, most people would say, well, I'm sure it's lawyer, because I can spell that. Let's find out. This is what Google Trends looks like. When you go to it, and it says explore the world, explore what the world is searching. Okay. And when you first go to it, they're going to give you just some fun, interesting little stats for the day. Like over here, they're talking about where are the most searches, who's being searched more right now, Taylor Swift or Kim Kardashian? And I know some of y'all are saying that's so stupid, but it's actually kind of interesting. Like if I click on this, what you're looking at is over the period of, this last month. Okay. And you can control the time period. But actually it says the past 7 days. See, look, I can drop this down and say from the beginning of time if I want. But who's the most popular? And over the past 7 days, guess who's winning? Kim Kardashian. Okay. Her search ranking is 59. Taylor Swift is 56. Now, you need to understand what those numbers mean. It doesn't mean they were searched 56 times. It's a popularity scale on a scale of 0 to 100, 100 being super duper popular. Now, the little graph you see here is over the last 7 days, like what time of day. And if you look closely, you'll see that the highest searches for both typically occur at 1 a.m. 1 a.m. Here is 11 p.m. It's fascinating what you can discover with Google Trends. Okay. Scroll down and take a look for the last 7 days. We can see that Taylor Swift is mostly searched on in the northern parts of the United States, while Kim Kardashian is searched in the southern states. Don't ask me why. I'm just telling you this is Google reporting back. Over here, you can see who's being searched on the most in these states, or you can just click on a state. Like I could click on, Texas. Okay. Look, here's Texas. And look, I can even look over here and it'll tell me, okay, here's these cities. Like in Austin. Look at this. Look how crazy this is. I'm looking at Austin, Texas on the searches, and it's almost even. It is even, in fact. The searches for Taylor Swift and Kim Kardashian over the last 7 days are practically even. But they tend to get a lot more popular towards when? Towards today, for whatever reason. Okay. Here's where it gets even creepier. Look, it's giving me neighborhoods. Some of y'all are going to get really creeped out by this. Now, the other thing it's going to show you, and I'm going to tell you this becomes very, very helpful, is it starts saying what kind of searches are the most popular in those areas right now. Okay. So Urban Outfitters, Taylor Swift. So obviously Taylor Swift is doing a collaboration with Urban Outfitters. And so a lot of people are searching on that. Taylor Swift Met Gala. Do you see what I'm saying? That's how this works. Then it shows Kim Kardashian. The most popular question in Austin, Texas is how many kids does Kim Kardashian have? And then Kardashian closet. And then obviously it gets really interesting. You see what I'm saying? But here's where it gets really interesting. We can put our own words in here. I was just showing you a national trend. And the only reason I showed you that national trend of Taylor Swift and Kim Kardashian is because I wanted to show you how deep you can go down to certain neighborhoods in large cities. Now, I will tell you this. You can't do that for every kind of search because there aren't enough searches sometimes. Now, Taylor Swift and Kim Kardashian are very popular searches. And so they have enough searches to give a statistical meaning. But if you're searching on something pretty specific, there may not be enough searches for it to drill down as far as a neighborhood. So just understand, if it doesn't let you go down to that level, it's only because there just aren't enough searches. But remember our earlier question, what are people typing in more? Attorneys or lawyers? Let's find out. All you do is you type right here, attorney. Okay, and take a look. Here's the search for attorney over the last 12 months. Okay. Now, the next thing you're going to do, and this is important, it says compare. You're going to click on compare, and you're going to add another keyword. So in this case, we're going to type lawyer. Now, what do y'all think it's going to be? Before I do it, y'all think attorney is searched on more or lawyer? Most people tend to think lawyer is searched on more, but guess what? The word attorney is actually searched on more. The word attorney is a more popular search. And you wouldn't have known that had you not gone to Google Trends. Okay, across every state. North Dakota seems to be the most popular state for those searches. I'm telling you, and you can drill down and you can see what people are talking about. And look, here's the common searches. So what I would recommend is that when you start coming up with some of the values that we talked about, the problems that you solve, you put them in here and you see what are people searching on the most. And then you might even drill down, if you can, to your area, like your state. And then if you can, maybe even to your city. I'm telling you, this is one of the most powerful tools, and it's completely free. It's kind of like seeing behind the scenes of Google, like the man behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz. And it just shows you what people are searching for. What's the most popular thing? Okay, so here we go. Let's go back to the presentation. So yeah, and trust me, you can spend hours at Google Trends. You really can. You can spend forever at Google Trends. And it's actually a lot of fun. But try to keep it based on your business. I mean, if you're an artist, you might look, are people looking up Southwest art or Western art? Are people looking up this or that? I mean, this is how you research what people are actually searching for. And you think you know how people are searching for you. You don't. Look at me. You don't. When I've talked to most business people and they give me what they think they're being searched on, and then when I actually go to Google Trends and show them what the most popular searches are, they are always wrong. And by wrong, I mean the business owners. Google doesn't lie about what people are searching for. Okay? Use this tool and don't just assume you know what people are searching for. Okay, let's go back. Okay, let's talk about ads that people buy. Now, what I'm talking about here are Google ads. Now, you need to understand kind of what Google ads is. Whenever you do a search on Google, Google will always return 10 results, okay? In other words, what Google considers the 10 most popular answers to whatever was typed in. And you get 10 per page. Always you get 10. Now, what it does is it adds to those 10. So you'll get actual 10, what Google considers the most relevant websites or the most relevant web pages for that search. That's what it's giving you. And remember, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you how it's kind of making that call, why it's picking your competitor over you. But added to those 10 natural or organic results, you're also going to find some ads. And you'll know there's ads because it has the word ad next to it. And how do those ads get there? Well, a company goes to Google and Google says, okay, we see that you're not coming up. When people search for this, you're not coming up. But guess what? You can pay to play. You can pay to play. And the way it works is this. A person types in kind of the keywords they want to be found on. Then they write an ad, a short little ad, and then they pay for it. But here's how the payment works. You're basically saying, I'm going to buy this number of clicks. You see, these ads are called pay per click. I know it sounds like paperclip. That's why I went slowly. It's called pay per click. In other words, these companies are only paying Google if someone actually clicks on their ad. Did you hear me? 1,000 people may see that ad, but if they don't click on it, it costs that company nothing, not a zero. You're only paying if someone actually clicks on the ad. Now the question is, how much are you paying? Well, it starts at 5 cents, a nickel per click. And it goes up from there. The most expensive click I've ever found was $400 a click. That's right. A company would actually pay Google $400 for each click it got on one of their ads. And some of y'all are going, I would never pay for a click. Yes, you would. You'd be happy to. You're saying, well, I would never pay $400. Well, do you want to know what that $400 click was for? For a multi-million-dollar yacht, for a very specific brand of a multi-million-dollar yacht. And that company is happy to pay $400 for someone who is actually looking for that specific yacht. And you're like, well, I would never pay, even $1 a click. Yes, you would. And I can prove it. If I were to come to you and I said, hey, I've got someone who's looking for what you sell. Okay. Pretend I'm talking to you. I've got a friend who's looking for what you sell. And I can't guarantee they'll buy from you, but what I can guarantee is they are looking for what you sell. And I will put them in front of you for $1. Would you give me $1 just for bringing you a qualified prospect? Of course you would. Of course you would. You see, that's what this is. That's what pay per click is. You're only paying Google if someone clicks on the ad. And you're probably thinking, well, what keeps my competitor from going to my ads and just clickety click, 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 and up, just up and eating all my money? Well, what you do is you set a daily limit. In other words, this is the maximum amount I will spend per day with Google. And once you reach that limit, all your ads are cut off until the next day. Also, only 1 click per computer are you paying for. So if your competitor is sitting, at their computer, clicking on your ads, you're only going to get charged once for 1 click, even if they click 1,000 times. I'm telling you, it's some of the best advertising you will ever do. And I highly recommend, if you really are serious about being found online, you need to start buying Google ads. I make no money from telling you this. I'm just saying everyone's doing it and it works. The key is coming up with finding the right keywords, just kind of what we're going to talk about. And the key is when you start this process, and it is a little bit of a process setting up your account, because they're going to ask you about your website, about what you do. In fact, Google's going to go look at your website and see what it thinks you do. Google's also going to look at your business account. Now, when I say business account, I mean the Google business account. The one you set up, telling what your hours are and where you're located on the map and all that. It looks at that too. But then it's going to say, okay, what keywords are you interested in being found on? And that's where the Google Keyword Planner comes in. The Google Keyword Planner, and I'm about to show it to you, it shows volume and prices, okay? It shows you and it's kind of a round, it's not an accurate, it's more a range. They're not going to give you exact numbers here, but they will show you kind of the amount of searches per day that are occurring on what you just typed in, and approximately from an ad standpoint, what you're going to pay per click. So let's go take a look. Okay. So here we are at the Google Keyword Planner. And like I said, I've already kind of gone through the process of setting up an account, all of that kind of stuff. And so down here, I have some of the searches, and I just threw in a couple. One says, I need someone to mow my yard. The other one I wrote was landscaping services. I wanted to kind of see from an ad standpoint what the difference is. So for I need someone to mow my yard, the average monthly searches is 10 to 100, okay, in the United States. 10 to 100, somewhere between 10 and 100. I need someone to mow my yard. That's very specific. The competition, however, is pretty high. In other words, there are 10 to 100, but the competition is high, meaning there's a lot of people who have bought ads for this. And you're saying, well, how do they decide who shows up as the first ad? Believe it or not, it's kind of like a bidding thing. And whoever's willing to pay the most per click wins. That's how the prices go up. So take a look. In order to be top of page, you're going to pay about $3.41 a click if you want to be at the top. Okay. This is the low range. This is the high range. And it explains what that means. Okay. So during really busy times like the summer, it's going to be up in the $10.68 a click. In the winter, it's going to be down here. Now look, for landscaping services, look at this. The average monthly searches is about 10,000 to, get this, 100,000 searches. There's not a lot of people who buy ads for this. And so the price per click is lower. And all you have to do is add another one. Okay. You just click on it and you go in and type what you want, and then it shows up down here. It's really that simple. And it's called the Keyword Planner. It does require, it's not like Google Trends where you can just immediately dive right into it. You kind of have to set up an account. But once you're in this actually gives you a little more accurate information than Google Trends does. And so I recommend it as a way of finding out what people are searching for. And once again, I don't just use this just to find that out. I use this to actually buy some ads. I'm telling you, ads will work if you write the right kind of ads. And by the way, the more specific ads you write, you know, I call them long tail ads. Long tail ads mean they're longer searches, more words in the search. They'll probably be cheaper. Okay. And there's a whole discussion on why that's a better thing than going for the vague. If you go for landscaping, you know, that's a very vague term. So you're going to pay a lot. But if you go for who in Albuquerque can mow my lawn or something like that, there's not a lot of people going for that. So you'll pay less per click, but you'll still get probably enough to go up to your daily limit. Okay, let's keep going. Finish this sentence. You've probably never noticed this. And that's because you don't usually see this on your computer that much. But on your phone, if you go get the Google app, and I highly recommend you do, whether you have an Apple iPhone or whether you have an Android or whatever, I recommend you download the Google app. Because what it will allow you to do is it'll allow you to search Google really quickly and use your voice to talk. Like you keep hearing my phone every once in a while, talk back to me. Well, that's the Google app. But one of the cool things that most people don't realize is that it has built-in autocomplete. Autocomplete is where Google tries to guess what you're typing in, and it gives you popular autocompletes so that you don't have to type it all in. It's kind of a secret way of knowing what is the most common thing people are typing in when they start asking this question or talking about this topic. It's a way for you to come up with a lot of these searches that you didn't even think about, because Google's going to tell you, like when you type in what landscaping services, and Google will autocomplete it for you. And it'll give you like 5 or 6 of how that's going to end. And it kind of gives you an idea of, I've learned so much, people, by just watching the autocomplete. Okay. Because it's kind of like a down and dirty Google Trends. It really is. Now, I also tell people, if you're going to do this on your computer, make sure you use incognito, because Google looks at the recent searches you've done and many times will serve up those, trying to save you time if you're doing the same search again. What you're wanting is what everyone else is typing in, not just what you've typed in the past. Incognito is kind of a way of hiding from Google who you are, so that it will give you more public responses rather than just your own. And try multiple variations. Just sit there and like I said, I talked about using incognito on a computer, but I tend to get better results when I do this on my phone in the Google app. And so that's kind of where I would probably go with this. Try multiple variations of different searches. And I'm telling you, autocomplete's going to give you some very interesting answers you probably didn't even think about. Type slowly. Don't start typing fast. And what's funny is even when you type just one word, like the word how, Google autocomplete will start giving you the most popular searches for the word how. It's fascinating. Now, there's also one called People Also Ask. Whenever you do a search, like, and I'll show this to you in a second. Whenever you do a search, it's kind of also an autocomplete, but it's different. When you scroll down in your search page on Google, it's going to give you like People Also Ask. It gives you other questions that people have asked, and it's kind of like autocomplete. But like I said, you're going to use it incognito. Let me just show it to you. That'll make more sense. Let's go to Google and let's type in, let's see, how do I boil an egg? So take a look at the results that come up, okay? So I get some recipes, but then look right here, People Also Ask. They also ask, how long do you boil an egg? How do you boil eggs step by step? Do you put eggs in hot or cold water to boil? Do you see what I'm saying? It's giving you like other questions, popular questions people ask along the same lines. If you start looking at the People Also Ask section, which that's why I kind of described it as kind of like autocomplete. If you look at this section, like I said, you scroll down, okay? And then here's the deal. If you drop one of these down, like how do you boil an egg? Notice what happened. When I dropped it down and it kind of gave me a short answer, it also gave me more questions, okay? Like now look at the new one that just got added. How do you know when boiled eggs are done? How long should I boil eggs in a microwave? How do you know when boiled eggs are done? If I drop that down, look what keeps happening. I keep getting more and more questions. And what you need to know is that these questions are actually very valuable searches. They're how people are searching for what you do. And this section is called People Also Ask. Okay. And let's get to the best part. This is the part I've been promising. So pay close attention. Once you figure out how people are searching for you, the question is, Eric, I know I can buy an ad and show up on page one, but Eric, I'm a cheapskate. And I also realize that 90% of the people are going to click on a non-ad. Did you know that 10% of people who search click on ads? Well, that means pretty much that 90% don't click on ads. 90% will click on who Google gives first. An organic, a natural result. So the obvious place you want to be is number one on Google for a certain search. You want Google to consider you the most relevant answer to that question, the most relevant solution to that problem. The way Google works is very simple. It has a bunch of programs. We'll call them spider bots. Okay, and these are computer programs that people wrote. And what these spider bots do is they crawl around the internet and they crawl around the web. Get it? That's why we call them spider bots. And they crawl around the web and they jump from web page to web page, from website to website. And what they do is when they land on a web page, they gobble up every word on that page. Words. They gobble up every word on that page and they send that to the mothership. They send that to Mother Google. And Google stores that. Every word. And then what they do is these little spider bots follow every link on that page. In other words, they're jumping from page to page, gobbling up every word on every page, pretty much getting every word on every page on the internet and storing it at Google. When you search Google, you're technically not searching the internet. You're searching Google's copy of it. The spider bots are what create that copy. So the obvious question is, why aren't you showing up on Google or on the first page when someone searches for what you do. I'm getting to that. And by the way, first page is really important. Some of y'all would say, well, Eric, I'm excited because I'm on the second page. If you go to the second page of Google results, because remember, Google will only give you 10 organic results, 10 natural results per page. You're saying, well, I'm technically number 11, so I'm at the top of page 2. And you know what I'm going to say? It doesn't matter. Because most people, if they don't find the answer they're looking for at the top of the first page or somewhere on that first page, they're going to change their search. Very few people go to the next page of Google results. I tell people all the time, you want to get away with murder? You hide the body on the second page of Google results because no one ever goes there. So the question is, if there's 1,000 pages out there that are the answer, how does Google pick who number 1 is? How does Google pick who number 2 is? Well, technically and legally, that's a very confidential answer. It's a company secret. No one knows it, including me. No one knows the answer. You got to realize that it's a mathematical algorithm that Google uses that helps rank one web page over another. In the beginning, it was based on how many times a word was mentioned. Like if I did a search on Corvette, well, a web page that mentioned the word Corvette twice would have been ranked above a web page that mentioned the word Corvette once. The problem is people who owned websites figured that out. And do y'all remember back in the old days when you would go to a website and down at the bottom of that page, you'd see just a whole bunch of words typed over and over and over. And sometimes they were almost hard to see, the same color as the background, you know. That was just people trying to trick Google into thinking that their page was more relevant than it really was. So don't let anyone ever tell you that simply start typing the same word over and over and over is going to help you rank better in Google. No, Google's onto that. And if they catch you doing that, that's called spamdexing, by the way. There's a whole word for it. It's called spamdexing. If Google catches you trying to trick it, and it's very good, if it catches you trying to trick it, you will be delisted. And do you realize that's basically website suicide? In other words, no one's ever going to find your website again. And you may as well take your website down because no one's ever going to find it. Don't try to trick Google and don't fall for people who claim to know how to get you to number 1 on Google. Did you hear me? Because you will get phone calls from people who will claim that they can guarantee you to be number 1 on Google. You hang up the phone immediately because whatever technique they're going to recommend, whatever they're going to promise to do for you, goes against Google's rules. And when Google figures out that you're with a crook, your website will be what suffers. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen. And it's next to impossible to get out of Google jail. You don't want that. Okay. So what Google does, if they're not looking at the number of times a word is mentioned, what Google does is they look at topics. I told you that Google systems are very smart. And they basically operate at a 5th grade level. So for instance, Google understands that an attorney and a lawyer are the same thing. So you don't have to use one word a whole bunch of times or both words a whole bunch of times. Google can also tell if the topic of what that page is about whatever it is someone's searching for, or if it's just a random mention of the word somewhere deep in a blog. But remember, the most important thing to remember is that this is all based on the text of your website, not the pictures. You could have 100 pictures of giraffes on a page, and Google would not know that that page is about giraffes. It's all based on the text. That's why some of you photographers, your website's never going to be found because your website is just full of pictures. There's no text. Google wants that text. Here's the keys to getting found, okay? Here's what you've been waiting for this whole time. And what I'm about to tell you, they do not go against Google's rules. And in fact, it's exactly what Google will tell you to do. And I know this works. First of all, the content. And when I say content, I mean text. The content on your web page, the content on your website, the text on your website must be unique to planet Earth. In other words, you can't just copy someone else's stuff on the internet and expect to be found. Only the first person who had it gets Google ranked. You're saying, well, Eric, I wouldn't plagiarize. I'm not talking about plagiarism. Think about it. Maybe you sell products. And so the manufacturer of the product gave you a product description you could use on your website. So you copied their product description and put it on your website. The problem is you weren't the first to have it. The manufacturer was. And he's letting everyone who sells their product use the same description. Oh, well, Eric, I'll just change one word in here and one word in there, and it'll be unique. No. What most people don't realize is that when you go to college these days, student papers are checked against a particular system, a system that looks for plagiarism. Professors will submit their students' papers into and it's called Copyscape. Copyscape. And what Copyscape will do is it will compare a student's paper against all the papers on the internet. And the way it determines whether something is plagiarized or not is it looks at, listen, it looks at the number of 4-word phrases that match between two documents. 4-word phrases. And if there's enough matches, it flags it as plagiarized. So changing just one word here and one word there, that doesn't make it unique. Every bit of content on your website, hear me, every bit of content on your website must be written from scratch. Because only the person who had it first gets ranked on Google. The second way to show up on Google, well, is what I call understandable content. You see, how did Google get to be number one? How did it beat out Ask Jeeves? How did it beat Bing? How did it beat AOL? How did it beat all these guys? Well, because over time, people discovered that the results Google was giving them were better results. They got better answers. And one of the ways that Google did that was the reading level. The reading level of the content. And what my friends at Google tell me is that in order for Google to like what you're putting out there, the reading level of your content should be around the 5th grade level. 5th grade. In other words, a 5th grader would be able to read it. Some of you are writing at a high school level, and your stuff will never show up number one. I mean, think about it. It makes sense if you think about it, because that's why you will never see a college thesis, a PhD thesis, as the number one result for any search on Google, because only someone at that level will understand it. And if a high schooler had typed in that search, they wouldn't even understand the paper they're reading, because the reading level is like 17, 18. You need to make sure that all the text on your website is written at a 5th grade level. The reason why 5th grade, you said, because 5th grade is what we call conversational. The way I'm speaking to you now is 5th grade. I'm not even using complete sentences, but I am using words that I know you'll be able to understand immediately without having to go to a dictionary. Problem is, back in English class in high school, we were taught to impress with our papers. So we would use big words all the time to impress our teachers. You can't do that. And the problem is, you as a business owner know too much. And so you will use big words, and then you'll wonder why you don't get found on Google. And that's because only people like you will understand what you wrote. 5th grade level, people. And by the way, you're saying, well, how can I find out the reading level? Microsoft Word will show you the reading level. Okay? Or there's even free websites that you can put some text in and it'll tell you the reading level. The final piece is the final point I'm making, is that Google also looks at how often you add to the content on your website. You can't just build a website and not touch it for a year, because the older the content gets, the less valuable it gets. Google's always going to put people with more current information ahead of those who have old information. So if you have a website, you need to make sure that you're either blogging something that the text is being added to on a regular basis. Okay, questions on anything I've gone over?
You know, I think it's always funny, and you guys get your questions in because you always say, put your phones down, stop with that web browser. Because I always find myself wanting to go back and I want to get on these Google sites and I want to learn everything about it. I will be sending a copy of the presentation. I'll also be sending a link to our YouTube channel and a link to rewatch this webinar. I also want to remind, last thing, Raina says, great webinar, thank you. I also want to remind everyone that we're lucky enough to have Eric for a series of webinars going into September. So if you have any questions, his stuff all kinds of kind of works together. It's all little puzzle pieces to make this big puzzle. So if you have questions on this webinar, bring them to the next one and he'll answer them.
Definitely.
And that is, yeah, I do not see any questions coming in.
Oh, there's one. How many keywords would you use per business? It's basic. Tie it to your services and products. Tie it to the values that the value you're bringing. There's no magic number. Think about everything you do. But the way I would start and the way I would rank what's most important is what product would you like to sell the most? In other words, what product do you have the best profit margin on? If you could just sell one thing really well, that's what I would start with. Okay. And then just keep adding to it. Great question.
When you talk about adding to it, let's say, okay, let's say we sell jeans. I'm just throwing that out there. So you would put in the keyword jeans, keyword boot cut jeans, or
Custom
like
jeans, Southwest jeans. Don't just type in jeans. That's way too vague. You need to, jeans for sale. You know what I'm saying? You want to think it through, but also remember the questions I told you to ask your customers, because your customers will tell you what they would search for. And remember, you're not qualified to know the answers to those questions. Only your customers are. I typically find my best answers by doing lawn care near me. Would that be a good search? Yes. Are more people around you looking for landscaping, lawn care, someone to mow my yard? Find out. Go to Google Trends. See what the most popular searches in your area are for that. It'll really help you. And then start writing about that. Just start writing about the topic. If the more you write, the more relevant you become to Google, and the more you'll just show up. And then buy ads based on that. The ads will get you there immediately, but the more you write, like blogging, you'll get there for free. It'll just take you a little bit.
I want to bring up this one thing before we pop off, is that you always do talk about Google. Can you explain why it's Google?
It's just, they're the only ones people use. It just 98% of all searches are on Google. And so it's just, no one else matters. It's just that simple. It's not a right or wrong, good or bad. That's just how it is.
And you do have a question that came in, Eric, if you want to answer that before we finish up.
Are dynamic ads good for Google? Yeah, ads that change is what you're saying, I think, is what you mean by dynamic ads. Yeah, definitely. And try different ads and see what people are clicking on. I mean, remember, you're not paying for ads that people don't click on. So if you see that certain ads, no one's clicking on it, ditch them, try a new one. But remember, be specific. If you're too vague, you're going to have people click on ads and you'll never get business out of them, because they're going to go to your website and realize, oh, I was talking about this. So be specific. You'll also pay less per click. You'll pay less per click if you're specific.
Another question came in. Can you use the keyword planner to plan your text for your website or your business without having a Google account yet?
It's hard. There is a way to kind of do it, but no, Google pretty much forces you to get an account. You don't have to pay, but you need to go ahead and create an account. So have a business account set up, and your SBDC counselor can help you set up your business account. And then that'll be a big start, and that costs you nothing. But then to set up your campaign, you can set up a whole campaign and all that without spending one dime, and use the keyword planner. But yeah, it takes a little more work than just going to Google Trends. So I would start at Google Trends first.
That is it. Oh, sorry, I put my video on and off. I am sending everyone a copy of the slides, so don't worry, you will get it in a follow-up email, just to remind everyone. I want to thank Eric, as always, great information, and you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.